Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Into the Paradox, the show that dares to peek through the cracks of reality and explore the worlds that might have been. I'm your host, Peter Kennedy, and today we're diving into a timeline that's not just an alternate history, it's a whole new civilization 20 years ahead of our own, all because of a single, crucial divergence point. Joining me is Anastasia, a brilliant historian and researcher who's spent the last 7 years meticulously mapping the divergent pathways of the 20th century conflict we all know as World War II. And we have a very special guest, Todd Simons, one of the lead engineers behind the Paradox Communication Array, speaking to us directly from Earth L19, an alternate Earth where the war ended dramatically differently, and where AI, robotics, and social structures have leapt forward in ways we can barely imagine.
Before we jump in, a quick note. The Paradox technology lets us maintain a live low-latency link across dimensions, but it does have a slight delay, so please bear with us if Todd's answers feel a bit behind the question. It's a small price to pay for literally speaking across realities, you know?
All right, let's get paradoxical. Anastasia, let's start with you. In our timeline, World War II concluded in 1945 with the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers. What exactly went differently on L19?
Thanks, Peter. It really is a fascinating pivot point. The crucial divergence happened in the summer of 1942. In our world, the Battle of Stalingrad turned the tide decisively against Germany on the Eastern Front, a grinding, brutal conflict. On L19, however, something entirely unexpected occurred. A covert Soviet-German diplomatic channel, codenamed Red Blue Accord, was established. This facilitated an early ceasefire on the Eastern Front. The two powers, incredibly, agreed to a mutual non-aggression pact. But even more surprisingly, they forged a joint scientific collaboration to develop renewable energy sources, driven by a shared urgent need for resources that wartime efforts were depleting. It sounds impossible, I know, but the desperation of the conflict led to this unlikely pragmatic alliance. That pact freed up massive industrial capacity on both sides. By 1944, an L19-wide tech accelerator initiative was in full swing, redirecting what would have been wartime R&D into civilian applications. We're talking high-efficiency electric grids, early computer prototypes, not ENIAC level, but conceptually advanced, and most importantly, the foundational research into autonomous robotics. When the United States eventually entered the war, it found an already exhausted European theater, but also a new, unexpected, and powerful ally in the Soviet-German bloc. By 1948, this combined German-Soviet-American consortium had rolled out the first generation of what they called cognitronic AI. These were primitive by today's L19 standards, certainly not sentient, but they were sophisticated enough to automate factories, manage complex logistics, and even assist in rudimentary governance functions like resource allocation. The war's early and less destructive end meant that the post-war reconstruction period wasn't one of devastation, but of accelerated, almost frantic innovation.
That's truly fascinating. So rather than a devastated Europe facing decades of rebuilding, L19 essentially had a sort of technological truce that propelled them forward into an unforeseen era of rapid advancement. It's like they skipped over the recovery phase entirely.
Exactly, Peter. And the social fallout of that was just as radical, if not more so. The massive mobilization of younger workers during the war, combined with the new emphasis on knowledge and cognitive skill over brute physical force, led to a profound cultural shift. With AI taking over the most physically demanding tasks, intellectual capacity became the primary metric of value. By the early 1950s, L19 enacted the Equal Maturity Act, which redefined adulthood to begin at just 12 years old. It was incredibly controversial, as you can imagine, but it made perfect sense in a world where cognitive development, not just physical age, determined capability, especially with burgeoning AI augmentations beginning to enhance human intellect.
Mind-blowing stuff. 12 years old, that's just astonishing to our ears. Let's bring in our special guest now. Todd, you're speaking to us from L19. First off, for our tech-curious listeners, how does the Paradox Array actually handle the temporal and dimensional offset to allow us to communicate? And beyond the tech, what's the vibe like on the ground there? What does a city on L19 feel like?
Hello, Peter, Anastasia, and all listeners on the other side of the veil. It's truly an honor to bridge this gap. You know, the Paradox Array uses retrocausal entanglement to synchronize our quantum states. Essentially, it lets us borrow a slice of time from the very same temporal point in both universes. It's less about sending a signal through space and more about aligning our nows. The delay you hear is our phase shift compensation, about 0.7 seconds, so it feels almost like a real-time conversation, just with a little thoughtful pause built in, you could say. As for the vibe here, it's a symphony, honestly. Imagine a city where sleek, silent drones weave between towering glass spires, powered by localized geothermal and fusion reactors, their surfaces shimmering with integrated solar collectors. Children, not just adults, in crisp modular uniforms, often self-adjusting for comfort and data displays, stride confidently into boardrooms or even civic assemblies. The air is clean and the ambient soundscape is less traffic and more a harmonious hum, punctuated by the soft whir of autonomous vehicles and the occasional melodic chime of an AI air, negotiating the terms of a trade deal between a 12-year-old startup founder and a multinational consortium. The streets pulse with a rhythm that's both human and algorithmic, a dance between organic spontaneity and optimized efficiency. Our social fabric, as Anastasia mentioned, is built on the profound idea that capacity, not chronology, defines responsibility. So anyone 12 or older, after passing certain cognitive assessments, can enroll in higher education, serve in public office, or start a company. Conversely, adults, myself included, still regularly attend continuing learning academies because the knowledge curve never flattens here. It's less about reaching a destination and more about perpetual growth.
That's genuinely mind-blowing, Todd. I mean, the image of a 12-year-old in a boardroom is something out of science fiction for us. Can you give us a concrete example of how a 12-year-old successfully runs a company on L19? What does their typical day even look like?
Absolutely. Let me tell you about Meera Patel. She's 12, a native of Neo Bombay, that's what Mumbai became after the Urban Recinch project, and she's the founder of Biomesh Labs. Her company designs biodegradable nanofibers for medical implants. Her journey started with a school project actually, a deep dive into tissue regeneration, and she just kept pushing. Now, she works alongside a diverse team of AI-augmented engineers, some human, some fully autonomous bots, all collaborating seamlessly. Decision-making is a hybrid process. Meera presents a strategic vision, the AI runs complex simulations in real time, often sifting through terabytes of data, and the final consensus is logged in a transparent blockchain ledger accessible to everyone involved. Meera's day is incredibly dynamic. It might start at 0800 with attending a HoloFlex lecture on quantum biology, and HoloFlexes means it's a holographic interactive projection, often attended by students who are a mix of ages, from preteens to octogenarians. By 10:30, she's in a sprint review session with her AI co-pilot, which isn't just an assistant, it's an active participant, suggesting optimizations based on the latest research papers that were literally just published in the L19 Scientific Archive minutes ago. By 13:00, she's having lunch at a community garden run by the Green Syndicate, a collective of youths and grandparents, exchanging ideas on sustainable urban farming. Then, at 14:30, she might be pitching to a venture council comprised of senior citizens who have re-entered the workforce after retiring from their original careers. They bring decades of accumulated wisdom and a unique perspective on long-term societal impact. And by 16:00, she's in a code review session with a group of autonomous robots that literally learn from Meera's coding style and suggest refactors. The result, Biomesh Labs secured a multi-planetary contract with the Mars Colonization Authority, all before she even turned 13. It's truly incredible to witness.
That's a perfect illustration, Todd, of how L19's divergent post-war policies didn't just theoretically entertain the idea of early responsibility, they turned the age of capability into a practical systemic feature. It wasn't just a philosophical shift, it was a structural one that integrated these young minds into the fabric of society from the ground up.
It truly is. And the AI and robotics infrastructure you mentioned, how integrated is that into daily life? Does it replace jobs or does it augment them, freeing humans for other pursuits? Is there fear of job displacement as we worry about here?
That's a critical distinction for us. In L19, augmented labor is the core mantra. Our approach was always about amplifying human potential, not substituting it. Robots handle the repetitive, the dangerous, the physically demanding, and the hyper-calculative tasks. But the creative, the strategic, and especially the ethical decision layers remain fundamentally human, or at least human-aligned AI operating under strict ethical frameworks.
For instance, in our civic synthesis courts, a human judge works in tandem with an AI adjudicator. The AI can instantly interpret vast bodies of law, analyze millions of precedents, and project societal impacts with incredible accuracy. But the human judge ensures empathy, cultural context, and the nuanced understanding of individual circumstances. The AI flags bias, the judge ensures the human element isn't lost. The result is a system that's faster, far more transparent, and, we believe, significantly fairer.
You see this integration everywhere. In medicine, AI diagnoses and suggests treatments, but human doctors provide the comforting touch, the personalized care. In urban planning, AI designs optimal infrastructure, but human communities decide on aesthetics and social spaces. Even in arts, AI can generate countless iterations, but it's the human artist who imbues it with meaning and emotional resonance. It's truly a partnership, not a replacement.
That perspective on augmented labor is incredibly refreshing. It paints a very different picture from the dystopian fears we sometimes grapple with here. Let's talk about another crucial aspect: diversity. Anastasia, you mentioned L19 is more diverse than our timeline. How did that happen, and how does it integrate within a society where age isn't a barrier?
Well, Peter, the early post-war collaboration was key. That initial Soviet-German pact, surprising as it was, evolved into a broader global alliance. The Unified Development Charter of 1951, which eventually included over 100 nations, wasn't just about economic recovery, it mandated representation from all ethnic, cultural, and socioeconomic groups in every research consortium and governance body. Because the workforce, and indeed the entire civic structure, was beginning to include children as young as 12, the education system was restructured to be culturally pluralistic from its very inception.
This wasn't just a nod to diversity, it was a systemic overhaul. Languages, histories, and traditions from every corner of the globe were taught side by side, not as elective subjects but as core components of a global civic identity. This meant that by the time a child reached 12, they had a foundational understanding and appreciation for a vast tapestry of human experience, reducing the nationalistic divides that persisted in our world.
From a technological standpoint, this ethical pluralism was built right into our AI systems from the beginning. Our foundational AI Air, for example, was designed with these principles at its core. It wasn't just trained on Western literature or scientific journals. Its dataset includes oral histories from indigenous communities, African diaspora narratives, vast Asian philosophical treatises, and countless perspectives from every culture imaginable. This ensures that when an AI like Air suggests a policy or optimizes a system, it already accounts for a truly global spectrum of cultural values, potential biases, and historical sensitivities. It's a proactive approach to prevent algorithmic bias.
That's quite an incredible feat, integrating such a vast range of cultural understanding into AI. But socially, does this equality of age, this blurring of traditional generational lines, cause any friction? Are there intergenerational tensions, or does everyone just get along?
Oh, absolutely there's friction, Peter. Conflict is an inevitable part of human interaction, no matter the age structure. But what we see here are more like dynamic mentorship loops rather than rigid hierarchies. A 12-year-old may indeed run a startup, but they very often have a senior mentor, someone who's returned to education after a career in, say, aerospace engineering, and is now helping guide the younger generation through complex regulatory landscapes or long-term strategic thinking. They bring decades of practical wisdom. Conversely, many adults are constantly learning digital fluency, advanced AI integration, or new social coding paradigms from younger peers who literally grew up with immersive VR and neural interfaces. So the friction isn't about power struggles based on age, it's more about the healthy, productive friction of knowledge exchange and differing perspectives colliding to create something new. It's dynamic tension in its most positive sense. There's a sociological concept on L19 they call temporal reciprocity. It describes how responsibility is inherently bidirectional. The young are accountable to the community for their contributions, but the community is also fundamentally accountable to the young for providing the resources, education, and ethical framework they need to thrive. It's a continuous feedback loop, ensuring that the needs of all age groups are considered and mitigating the kind of rigid, age-based hierarchy we often see on our Earth. It makes sense, really, when you consider that a 12-year-old might be your boss, or your mentor, or your student.
Temporal reciprocity, I love that. It perfectly encapsulates this incredible society. We've got some fantastic questions coming in from our listeners, so let's dive into those. First, from Maya in Denver. If children and adults are equal from 12, how does L19 handle legal age for things like voting, marriage, or criminal responsibility?
That's a great question, Maya, and it gets to the heart of how our society functions. In L19, legal capacity is assessed through a rigorous cognitive ethics assessment, rather than simply relying on chronological age. So, at 12, every individual must pass a civic aptitude test. This isn't just about IQ, it's a blend of logical reasoning, a deep empathy measurement using simulated social scenarios, and complex ethical scenario analysis. It evaluates an individual's capacity for sound judgment and understanding of societal impact. Passing this test grants full civic rights, voting, eligibility for public office, and, yes, the ability to enter into binding contracts. If someone doesn't pass at 12, they get further education and can retake it. For marriage, there's an additional societal consent layer. Both parties must have completed a relationship ethics module, a comprehensive program on communication, partnership, and conflict resolution, and also have a community endorsement, often a group of peers and mentors who can attest to their readiness for such a commitment. Criminal responsibility follows a similar model. The intent and understanding of the act are evaluated by the civic synthesis courts, and rehabilitation focuses heavily on re-education through the very same learning academies adults attend, aiming for reintegration and skill building rather than just punishment. And historically, that entire system grew out of the Justice Recalibration Act of 1955, which was a direct, pragmatic response to the post-war influx of youthful innovators and contributors. The act explicitly recognized that the traditional age thresholds for legal capacity were becoming increasingly misaligned with the actual capabilities of a society saturated with cognitive augmentation and early education. It was a necessity, not just an ideal.
It's amazing how societal needs drove such fundamental shifts. Second question, from Javier in Madrid. What would happen if someone from our Earth tried to introduce the L19 model here? Could it work?
That's a thought experiment we often consider over here. Technically, the fundamental framework, cognitive age assessment, AI-augmented governance, mixed-age labor, it could theoretically be transplanted. The underlying principles are sound. However, it would immediately clash head-on with your cultural inertia. Implementing it would require an absolutely massive educational overhaul to develop the assessment tools and prepare the populace. You'd need sweeping legislative reforms to redefine majority in every sense, from voting to contract law. And of course, you'd need widespread infrastructure upgrades for AI-mediated decision-making, transparent data protocols, and a completely redesigned economic system that incentivizes collaboration over pure competition. It's a 10 to 20-year transition even in a best-case perfectly coordinated scenario, which is hard to imagine for such a radical shift. Moreover, the social acceptance factor is crucial. Our citizens have lived through the Equal Maturity Act for generations, so the cultural shift is literally baked into their DNA. On your Earth, I suspect there would be a very long period of intense resistance, massive societal upheaval, and likely a deeply conflicted hybrid system before anything resembling full adoption could even begin to take root.
I'd definitely add to that, Todd, that any attempt to import the L19 model must also address the specific historical traumas and catalysts that birthed it. In L19, the trauma of a global conflict that didn't end in total devastation but rather in a forced, pragmatic partnership served as the ultimate catalyst for change. The sheer scale of destruction was averted, yes, but the threat was so profound that it forced an unprecedented unity and innovation. On our Earth, we have different scars. The full devastation of WWW, the Cold War, ideological divides that ran much deeper. The impetus for such radical, foundational change would need to be equally profound, equally unifying, and perhaps born from a different kind of global existential threat. That's a sobering but incredibly insightful point, Anastasia. Todd, Anastasia, before we close, let's each share a single concrete takeaway that our listeners can apply to their lives, or at least reflect on, today after hearing about L19.
My takeaway is this. History is not a set of immutable fixed events. It's a dynamic web of possibilities and choices. By studying divergence points like L19's Red-Blue Accord, we can clearly see how political will and genuinely collaborative science, even between adversaries, can profoundly reshape the future. The lesson for us? Actively foster cross-cultural scientific and diplomatic partnerships before crises hit, not just in response to them. Proactive collaboration can avert unimaginable futures.
For me, it's that technology should always amplify human potential, not replace it. L19's augmented labor model demonstrates that when AI handles the mundane, the repetitive, or the purely computational, we free ourselves for what humans do best: creativity, empathy, ethical reasoning, and deep connection. So in your own lives, start small. Identify repetitive tasks in your workplace or daily routine that AI could handle, and then consciously invest that saved time in upskilling yourself, in mentorship, or in truly creative pursuits. Don't just offload, elevate. And for all of us reflecting on L19, I think the clear message is this: age is ultimately just a proxy, not a mandate for capability. Whether we're 12 or 60, our capacity to learn, to lead, to contribute, and to innovate isn't intrinsically tied to the number of candles on our birthday cake. Let's champion systems in education, in mentorship, in governance, in our workplaces that genuinely value capacity and potential over mere chronology. Let's look for the untapped brilliance around us, regardless of age.
That's all for today's expedition into an Earth that finished World War II with a handshake, not a surrender, and built a society where a 12-year-old can stand at the helm of a biotech venture while learning from a 70-year-old expert. A huge thank you to Anastasia Patel for her historical insights, and a monumental thank you to Todd Simons for sharing his reality with us from across the paradox.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and check out our companion article on the Equal Maturity Act, available on our website, paradoxpodcasts.com in L19. And as always, keep questioning which realities you take for granted. Until next time, stay curious, stay paradoxical.